Hello, my name is Michael Levy. I'm a co-director of the PASS program. I'd like to welcome you all to the session for Indian CAs on achieving the Canadian CPA. When it comes to going for your Canadian CPA, I'm not going to lie to you. It is a difficult exam you're going to need to write. It's going to take patience. It's going to take persistence. It's going to take discipline. But the good news is it's very much doable. Many Indian CAs have written the CP, the exam you need to pass for your Canadian CPA, and many of them have been successful. It's not something they were able to achieve overnight. It took a number of months of sustained effort, but with the right attitude, it is very much achievable. So let's take a look now at the table of contents for what I'd like to cover over the course of this session. We'll start with an overview of the CPA program and the CP, that CP being the final exam and the one exam you're going to need to write as an Indian CA. We'll then talk about changes to the CPA program that are on the horizon for 2027. I'm sure many of you have heard that there are some major changes on the horizon. We'll talk about them. We'll talk about case writing and technical studying. This is a case-based exam, so we'll talk a little bit about case writing as well as technical preparation for the exam. At the end of point 3, my partner, who you'll be meeting very shortly, Ira Walfish, the other co-director of PASS, will take over, and he'll talk about the PASS CP program for Indian students, and I'll be doing a part of that also. We'll then move on to scheduling the writing of the exam. We'll show you some testimonials from previous Indian writers who've taken the PASS course and benefited from it, and you can have a chance to hear directly what they have to say. We'll then talk about registration with PASS and the fees for the course. We'll then talk about registration with the CPA Provincial Institute. You don't just need to register with PASS to take our course, but you also need to register with the respective institute depending on where you live. We'll get into that in more detail a little later on, or quite a bit later on. We'll talk very briefly about immigration. We're not going to get into detail on immigration just because Ira and I don't have the expertise, but we'll certainly give you a contact who does have the expertise for those people who are not yet in Canada. Obviously, point 9 will not be relevant if you're already living in Canada or you already have your PR. And then finally, we'll just give you some contact information in case you'd like to contact myself or my partner Ira with further questions after you watch this session. So let's start with part 1, which is basically an overview of the CPA program and the CP. The way that the program works is let's start with the standard program for a typical Canadian student, and then you'll see the huge contrast in terms of what an Indian CA needs to do because of the MOU between India and Canada. A typical Canadian student has quite a long journey to get their CPA. They first have to take 2 modules called Core 1 and Core 2. Core 1 focuses primarily on financial accounting. Core 2 focuses primarily on management accounting. And at the end of these modules, they have to write exams. After that, they have to attend elective modules. And then once again, they have to write exam. So there are a number of exams they need to get through before they even get close to their CP. Actually, 4 exams, Core 1, Core 2, and 2 elective exams. Then they have to go to Capstone 1. Capstone 1 involves working with a group on a large business case, and then doing a written presentation for a mock board of directors or a high-level executive team, and then making an oral presentation. After Capstone 1, they would then move on to Capstone 2. In Capstone 2, they would be writing old, when I say old, I mean prior CP cases, and having them professionally marked. An Indian CA goes directly to the CP. So they don't need to do Core 1 or Core 2 or the elective exams or modules. They don't need to do Capstone 1 and they don't need to do Capstone 2. They can go directly to the CP. Now, later on, we'll talk about the benefit of Capstone 2. Capstone 2 is there completely for your benefit, gives you a chance to write prior CPs and have them professionally marked. So as you'll see later on, because you don't go to Capstone 2, you'll see that PASS has an option where you can do the equivalent of Capstone 2 through PASS, so you're not at a disadvantage to Canadian students who have attended Capstone 2 and had the opportunity to write prior CPs. Now, the 2026 CP will be from June 2nd to June 4th of 2026, and there'll be another September sitting, September 15th to the 17th. So here's just a diagram that basically points out the difference between an Indian CA and a Canadian student trying to get their CPA. As you can see, you're exempt from the technical modules, which is Core 1, Core 2, and the 2 electives I just described. You're exempt from Capstone 1 and 2. All you got to do as an Indian CA is go directly to the CP. What I'd like to do now is give you a description of the CP. The CP, as I mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation, is a case-based exam. So it's very much quite different than the Indian CA exam. On the Indian CA exam, to the best of our knowledge, based on our discussions with our students, does not have large cases that need to be written. As you'll see in a moment when I look at the exam in more detail, there are large cases that need to be written as part of the CP, and the whole CP is case-based. There is no multiple choice. There are no short answer questions. It is 100% case-based. And one of the skills you need to learn in order to write the CP is the ability to deal with multiple issues from multiple subject areas all in one case. So it's not like the cases are single subject. You know, I'm going to write a case on financial accounting, or I'm going to write a case on management accounting. All of the cases involve more than one subject area, what we call competency in the lingo of the CP. The time for the cases can range anywhere from 70 minutes to as long as 5 hours. So again, there are no short cases. The shortest case we have is 70 minutes, and the longest is 5 hours. Let me take a look here before I go any further. I see there are questions in the chat box. Let's take a look at them. Puman asks, for Indian CAs, is it mandatory to complete 2 years of experience after CA qualified to enroll? The work experience I'm often get into because it really does depend on your situation. Do you have a university degree? Do you not have a university degree? At the end of the session, I'm going to give you links, or Ira will give you links that deal specifically with international students and specifically with Indian students, where this information will be delineated. So if you don't mind, we'll give you the links where you can actually see the details, and then you can see what you would need to do in your particular situation. The next CP is in May. Rahim is asking about the next CP. The next CP is in May 2025. That is correct. Okay, yeah, we got it. I see somebody else answered that question. Okay, great. On a short case, you need to read 5 or 6 pages, and on a long case, as many as 15 to 20 pages. So even the short cases I mentioned a moment ago, even the short cases are not really very short. They're just shorter than the long cases. Typically, the way that a case looks is you typically have about a page with the main body of the case. Sometimes it could be a page and a bit. It's not unusual to have a page plus a paragraph or two, but it's generally not longer than that. And then the rest of the case is made up by appendices. Even on a shorter case, even on a 70 or 80-minute case, you can have 4 or 5 appendices. On a 5-hour case, you can have a lot more than that. So most of the information is in the appendices. In case people don't know what I mean by the main body of a case, this is an example from a simulated past case. As you can see from the simulated case, you have the main body here. In the main body, generally you're told what most of the requireds are. What are most of the things you're required to do? And then the appendices contain most of the information you need to address the requireds. There can be the odd required in an appendix, but most of the requireds are given to you in the main body. This is an example of a main body of a case. You've all received, you all have the PowerPoint. So if you want to look at the main body more closely yourselves at some point, feel free to do so. Now let's talk about the breakdown of the CP. The CP is 3 days long. Day 1 is a large 4-hour case based on Capstone 1. So we mentioned earlier when I was giving you an overview that Capstone 1 is a module that all Canadian students must take, in which you work on a big business case together. And at the end of the module, you do a presentation to a board of directors, both an oral presentation as well as a written presentation. It's based on a fictional company. When you walk into day one of the CP, the case you're going to be writing is based on that same fictional company that you worked on when you were doing Capstone 1. So that raises a question that I think many Indian CAs would be concerned about, and that is, if I'm exempt from Capstone 1, and I therefore choose not to go to Capstone 1, which is the case for the vast majority of Indian CAs, the vast majority of our students do not go to Capstone 1. In that case, how am I going to be prepared for day one, which is based on Capstone 1? So let me explain. The way that day one works is you're dealing with the same fictional company as I mentioned a moment ago, but you're now dealing with new issues that the company is facing. It may be a number of years down the road, and the company is facing new operational and strategic issues, and you need to deal with it. So how do I deal with these issues if I never took Capstone 1? So the answer is that at PASS, what we will do is we will give you a summary of all the information you need to know from Capstone 1 so that you can write day one effectively, and therefore you're not going to have a problem. Okay? I see over here that there's a question about a letter of good standing. Where they charge for assessing my letter of good standing. They also might undergo another assessment or another. Okay, I'll be honest with you, neither Ira nor I can get into the issue of what the various institutes do. I really can't add a lot of value here. I mean, when you're dealing with the institute, if you want further understanding, you need to deal with the institute. You know what I mean? We're independent of the Western School of Business. We're independent of CPA Ontario. For those sort of things, you really do need to deal with the Western School of Business. There's not a whole lot that Ira and I can do when it comes to your dealings with the provincial institutes or the Western School of Business. I'm sorry about that. On day two, you would be writing a large 5-hour case. The 5-hour case on day two is referred to as the roll case. You'll see in a moment why it's referred to as a roll case. In a nutshell, you choose a specific role on that day. We'll explain that in more detail when we get to the day two case. On day three, you're going to be writing 3 short cases. Each case will be anywhere from 70 to 90 minutes, and all 3 cases will add up to 4 hours. These cases are often referred to as multi-competency cases because they'll test a number of different competencies, a number of different subject areas, and we often refer to these cases as multi for short. So when Ira or I use the term multi, we mean a day 3 case. All cases test more than one competency, more than one subject, but as you'll see in a few minutes, the multi cases test more competencies than the day 2 case, which is the roll case. I see there's another question. You said group presentation. Can you elaborate on this? Basically, the way it works is, again, most people don't take Capstone 1, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time in it because hardly any Indians take it. But basically, what you're doing is you're supposed to come up with a presentation that would be similar to the type of presentation that one would do for a board of directors or a group of senior executives. So in Capstone 1, you're generally dealing with high-level business type issues, the sort of issues that you would bring at the highest level within the organization to a board of directors. So this presentation is first submitted in writing, and then it's presented as a group orally. And then following the presentation, the simulated board of directors or the simulated group of senior executives would then pepper the group with questions. It's all done as a group. Nothing is done individually. That's basically in a nutshell how the presentation works. I hope that answers your question, Ray. Hello, my name is... Continuing onward, I keep mentioning about competencies. I said in the previous slide that on day 3, many competencies are tested. On day 2, a lesser number of competencies is tested. By competencies, I mean subject areas. There are 6 competencies or 6 subject areas that are examinable on the CP. audit and assurance, financial reporting, management accounting, finance, taxation, and then strategy and governance. Let's now look at each day individually, okay? Oh, Akil asks, how do we select day one case if we're not doing capstone one? And when do we select it, assuming appearing in May 2025? So at the end of the day, every year, they have 2 day one cases that they give you a choice from. One is from a previous CP, and it's intended generally for repeat writers who've already who wrote the CP, who wrote that particular CP. And then there's a new capstone one case. You would generally take the new capstone one case. Unless you're a repeat writer, you would take the new capstone one case. You're not going to have to make your choice until well into the new year. Okay, so you don't have to decide that yet. Well into the new year, you're going to be getting a letter from or an email from whoever you registered with, whether it's out west or CPA Ontario for many of you. And at that point, you'll make your choice. You have a long time until you need to make that choice. But it's not a difficult choice to make, quite honestly, because as long as you're not a repeat writer, you would take the new case that was developed for your CP. Okay, and Keith is asking, we're exempt from capstone 2. However, if one opts to take it, will that benefit us for the CP? Okay, I don't want to get too much into this because Ira will address this in more detail later on. But in a nutshell, there's no question in the world that capstone 2 is extremely helpful for the CP. Because what capstone 2 does is it has you writing practice CP cases, which are marked professionally, and that gives you a wonderful opportunity to practice writing real CP cases. So is capstone 2 useful? No question. However, because PASS believes that capstone 2 is very important, we have come up with an equivalent to capstone 2 that you can attend through PASS, and it's a great deal less expensive than going to CPA Canada's capstone 2. So yes, it's important, but we recommend that you do it through PASS, as you'll get basically the same experience in writing practice cases and the same opportunity to have them professionally marked as if you went to CPA Canada's capstone 2, but at a much lesser cost. But I'd rather say no more at this point, as Ira will be addressing that in his presentation. Let's take a look now at day one of the CP. On day one of the CP, you're going to write one large 4-hour case. As I mentioned before, it's based on the capstone 1 case. You're dealing with the same fictional company, but now they're dealing with new issues, new strategic and operational issues a number of years down the road. It's marked separately from days 2 and 3. It's simply a pass or fail. And because it's marked separately from days 2 and 3, you can pass day 1 and unfortunately potentially fail days 2 and 3, in which case you'd only have to write day 2 and 3 on its own. You wouldn't have to write day 1 again. Day 1 is marked separately from days 2 and 3. You don't get a mark, you just get a pass or fail. It's not intended to be very technical. It's, as I mentioned earlier, it's based on capstone 1, and capstone 1 is meant to be dealing with high-level business issues, high-level analysis, as opposed to days 2 and 3, which are far more technical. Now let's take a look at day 2 of the CP. Day 2 of the CP, I mentioned earlier, is a 5-hour case, and I called it earlier a roll case. You'll see in a moment why it's called a roll case. The day 2 case will test financial accounting and or management accounting. In theory, they only have to test one or the other. In practice, in the last 5 years or so, there hasn't been one CP that didn't test both. So there's about a 95 or 99% probability that you will be tested on both financial and management accounting on day 2 of the CP. Now, why is it called a roll case? The reason why it's called a roll case is everybody needs to deal with financial accounting and management accounting. But the remaining things you're going to need to do on this case will relate to the role that you chose. And you'll have a choice of 4 roles. You can choose audit, you can choose tax, you can choose performance management, which is a combination of management accounting and strategy and governance, or you can choose finance. So at the end of the day, you're typically going to be dealing with 3 competencies. financial accounting and management accounting, plus whatever role you chose. So if I chose audit and assurance, what's going to happen is I'm going to have to deal in all likelihood with financial accounting and management accounting. Even though they only have to test one, they generally test both. So I'll have to deal with financial and management accounting. And then all the remaining requires that I need to deal with will relate to assurance. If, on the other hand, the person next to me, sitting next to me in the exam, chose tax, she's going to have to deal with the same financial accounting and management accounting issues as I deal with. But on top of that, all the rest of her requirements are going to relate to tax. So at the end of the day, that is why this is called the role case, because you're choosing a specific role and the requirements you deal with is a function of that. You don't have to choose your role for a long time still. Fairly shortly before the CP, you'll be asked to choose a role. So it's not something you have to think about for quite a while. Day 3 of the CP, you're going to be writing 3 cases, which will add up to 4 hours, each case being from 70 to 90 minutes. Unlike the case of the roll comp, where the maximum of the roll case, where the maximum number of competencies you're going to deal with is 3, financial management accounting plus your role, on day 3 of the CP, you're going to be dealing with anywhere between 4 and 6 competencies. So when you look at these 6 competencies here, you may have to deal with all 6 on one 90-minute case or 80-minute case. The minimum you'll be dealing with on a day 3 case is going to be 4 of these competencies. Unlike the case of day 2, everybody writes exactly the same cases. You don't choose a role for day 3. Day 2 and day 3 are marked together. So let's say you're unsuccessful, as we said earlier, on day 2 and 3. You would only have to write day 2 and 3. You would not have to write day 1 again. So at the end of the day, if you fail day 1, you repeat day 1. If you fail day 2 and 3, you repeat day 2 and 3. So the nice thing here is it's not like if I miss one day, I have to write the whole exam again. I missed day 1. Okay, that's unfortunate. I'll write day 1 again. But if I pass day 2 and 3, I don't have to write those again. And the same thing would be true vice versa. Here are some key facts. Akhil asks, is it correct to say that one is tested on the competency they choose only on day 2? No, the way it works, Akhil, is these competencies, audit, tax, PM, finance, can come up throughout the CP. But on day 2, you would be tested on these competencies in more depth. You would be, if I chose, for example, audit as my depth area, as my role on day 2, that's the opportunity that the CP has to test me at a very high level on that particular competency. So although audit can also come up on day 3, it would come up at a lower level on day 3 than day 2. Day 2 is the opportunity to test you on a given role at a higher level. Is that clear, Akhil? I was told earlier, this is Jay. Okay, great. Thank you. You're welcome, Akhil. Jay asks, I was told earlier that if I failed day 1 but passed day 2 and 3, then I would be required to pass day 1 to 3 again. You were told incorrectly. Okay, whoever told you that was just mistaken. Okay, unfortunately, we have had students who've unfortunately failed day 1 and passed day 2 and 3, and they only wrote day 1 again. Okay, this is from personal experience. Okay, let's continue onward. Here are some key facts about the CP. Everyone in Canada writes the same CP exam. It's a national exam. So although you register with a provincial institute like CPA Ontario, or if you're out west, the Western School of Business, you're still writing the same exam. You're just dealing with a provincial institute for administrative purposes. You've got 3 attempts. Hopefully you won't need those three attempts, but you do have 3 attempts in case you need them. The exam is written on computer using Word and Excel, so nothing is handed in handwriting. Typically, the qualitative portion of your answer, you'll be writing in Word, and the quants you'd be doing in Excel. But the actual question itself, the actual exam itself, is given to you in physical paper form. It's an open book exam, so to speak, because you have access to the CPA handbook that has the accounting standards as well as the assurance standards. You also have access to the Tax Act. So you don't have to memorize everything. Obviously, you only have limited time to refer to your handbook. So you still need to come into the exam with a fair amount of knowledge. But if you can't remember every last detail, you can look it up on the exam. It doesn't matter in which Canadian province you write your exam because you can write the exam in one province and then practice in another province. CPAs in Canada move all the time. So, there are lots of CPAs who wrote their exams, say in Montreal, Quebec, and then they decided to move to Toronto, Ontario. No problem. Once you have your CPA, because it's a national exam, it doesn't matter at all in what province you wrote it. You can move to any province you. As I mentioned in the introduction, there are some major changes that are taking place to the CPA education program in O27. So I'd just like to keep you abreast of them right now. What they're doing in O27 is they're actually literally revamping the education program. And that will result in the CP being replaced by a completely new set of exams, a complete new set of exams. Also, the competency map will be which is effectively a syllabus, will be significantly changed to emphasize additional items beyond the traditional subjects relevant to the CPA designation. So although data analytics is already being tested, it's going to be tested in all likelihood at a higher level in the future. And they're going to add soft topics like organizational behavior, sustainability, including social and governance, the sort of topics that are highly unlikely you would have ever covered when you studied for your CA in India. So unfortunately, they're now broadening the examinable material, which again, I think would make it more difficult for an Indian CA who studied more of the traditional topics that an accountant would need. Now, there's still going to be a September CP in O27 and O28. There will not be a May exam, but there will be a September exam. It's not 100% clear who will be eligible to write in O27 and O28. I've not been able to get a definitive answer from CPA Ontario when I called them, and I don't think I'd get a definitive answer from any other institute. However, it is extremely likely that you will be able to write as an Indian CA in O27, O28. So although I can't tell you this with absolute certainty, I can say that I have every expectation that you will be able to write in O27 and O28. O26, there's no question, but even O27 and O28, my expectation is that you will be able to write, although I can't give you a 100% definitive answer. Right now, CPA Canada is so busy dealing with the new system. I guess worrying about what international students will do, I guess that's not at this point something they've had time to look at that closely. But again, there's right now no reason to believe you wouldn't be able to write. Now, we don't know under the new system, for those who would write under the new system that starts in O27, remember, in O27, O28, we have the old CP going, but we also have the new system beginning. So in case anybody were to write under the new system, we don't yet have an MOU. There's a good possibility there'll be an MOU, but at this point it's too early to say. Even if there is an MOU, at this stage, we have no idea what it will entail. Because right now, under the new system, there are going to be 4 modules and exams, and it's not clear how many modules CAs from India would need to attend. It's also not clear how many exams they would need to write because we don't have an MOU under the new system. So it's a bit of it's not a bit of a question mark, it's a big question mark exactly what an MOU would look like and what exemptions you would get. Under the current system, we know exactly what you get. You're exempt from virtually everything. All you have to write is the CP. Under the new system, I really don't know. So one drawback of not writing under the current system is you don't know what exemptions you're going to get. A perhaps even bigger drawback is that the new exams will test new topics, as I mentioned earlier. So all these different soft topics that are not traditional topics that an accountant would learn, and that you probably, I can say almost certainly, did not cover in your Indian CA exams. In your Indian CA studies, you would have dealt with things like value creation, sustainability, environmental and social governance. So that also, I think, would be a bigger challenge for Indian CAs because it's new material, as opposed to the current exam where it's testing effectively, for the most part, the traditional areas that you would typically cover as an Indian CA when writing the Indian CA exam. So if you want to cut your risk and you don't have to want to worry about will there be an MOU and what will the MOU look like, and you don't want to have to worry about all these new soft topics that you probably never learned, you can easily cut your risk by writing the CP. Your best bet would be to write an O26 if you can. This session is being recorded at the end of December of 025. Bottom line is, at this stage, it's certainly not too late to write in 026, and Ira will address that in more detail later, but it's certainly not too late to write in 026. And if you can't write in 026, as I said earlier, it's extremely likely that you will be able to write in 027 or 028. So you'll have the opportunity to still write the CFE, even if you can't write in 026. Again, there is enough time to write in 026. There's enough time to study. But if you don't, in all likelihood, you'll still have an opportunity to write the CFE in 027 and 28. And I would recommend you stick with the CFE rather than joining the new program. Now I'm going to talk about case writing and technical. I mentioned earlier that this is a case-based exam. So probably the biggest challenge that Indian CAs face, and again, it's a surmountable challenge, so don't worry. But the biggest challenge Indian CAs face is case writing. Because Indian CAs, unlike Canadian students, did not write large cases throughout their university studies. So now suddenly they have to learn how to write cases. So a huge emphasis, as Ira will describe when he describes the past course, is teaching you how to write cases. The earlier you start, the better, because at the end of the day, we find that different people take different amounts of time to learn how to write cases. Some people catch on really quickly, some people take longer. So the longer you give yourself, the better. If you can start your studying about a year in advance of the CP, so that would be absolutely ideal. It's now October. If you were to write in September, you'd have almost a year. That would be ideal. It's still probably not too late to write in May, but as we'll discuss in more detail later, the bottom line is you want to leave yourselves a lot of time to prepare. Because again, most people can't learn how to write cases overnight, just not the nature of case writing. Now, you're writing the cases and you're studying while you're working full-time typically. As long as you have a job, there's no need to quit your job. The system is designed so people can study while they're working, okay? So at the end of the day, the beauty of this system is you can be financially supporting yourself while you're studying. And you would typically be writing practice cases and studying technical together. Some of the technical you're going to study on its own in isolation. Other technical you're going to learn from the case writing. And we'll get into that in a lot more detail when you get to the course. I see that Amita has a question. How can we get hold of previous year CP questions and suggested answers? So the bottom line is, if you were to Google CP reports in Google, they would take you to the CPA website where they've got past CP questions as well as suggested answers. If you want detailed marking guides, that you'd have to purchase closer to the time of the CP. But if you just want to be able to see the questions and the suggested answers, you could do that right after the session. Just put into Google CP reports and you'll have a chance to see past CP questions and suggested answers. Now, I mentioned earlier that you could learn some of your technical from case writing, but you would also spend a certain amount of time just studying technical on its own. The two biggest areas tested on the CP are financial accounting, and there's a lot to know there. That's probably where you need the largest body of knowledge, because you need to know both IFRS, which some of you are familiar with, but you also need to know ASPE, which probably none of you or hardly any of you are familiar with unless you're already working, in Canada and dealing with financial accounting. So I should say, if you're working in it, you probably do know something about ASPE. Otherwise, you probably don't. And the reason why you wouldn't know about it unless you're working in it is ASPE is accounting standards that were developed specifically for private enterprise. And they basically were developed within Canada. So they're not used outside of Canada. So unless you're working with ASPE, that would be something new that you would need to learn. The second big, the other big area that is management accounting. So the weighting is the same for both financial accounting and management accounting. You've got the same weighting on the exam. Both are tested equally. However, the amount of studying required is far greater for financial accounting than it is for management accounting. And the reason for that is the body of knowledge for financial accounting is much larger than the body of knowledge required for management accounting. Now, a second challenge that Indian CAs have when it comes to technical is tax, okay? Tax, the good thing about tax is that unless you choose tax as your role on day 2, you don't need to know a lot of the complexities. You just need to know the basics, basic compliance typically. Very, very minimal knowledge is required when it comes to more sophisticated tax planning. So at the end of the day, you need to know things like how to compute taxable income. You need to know what's deductible. The reason why I say it's a second challenge is financial accounting is the area with the greatest amount of knowledge. So that we'll put that number 1. Tax is probably number 2 because even though the knowledge base required for tax is not as great as for financial accounting, nevertheless, it's a challenge for a foreign CA. Because as we said earlier, taxation in Canada, I think I'm no expert on Indian tax, but I know it's very different. So even though the body of knowledge is not huge, it's new information. Amit is asking, since writing cases new to Indian CAs, do you have a specific module where only writing cases are taught? We spend a huge amount of time in our course teaching you how to write cases. That is a huge, it's a huge component of the past course. We have you writing a far greater number of cases than our Canadian students. We take up these cases with you in class, in a virtual class. We have them professionally marked. We even have private counseling sessions where you meet with a marker to go over some of your exams. So yes, it's a major component of the past course because we realize that for Indian CAs, that probably is the biggest challenge, learning how to write cases effectively. Now, what about the other competencies, audit, finance, and governance? For audit and governance, you pick up most of the knowledge that you need from writing cases. Yes, you will have to do some studying in assurance beyond what you write in the cases. For example, you'll have to learn about the different reports you can give. But when it comes to things like risk, materiality, when it comes to planning in general, when it comes to procedures, when it comes to controls, that you pick up primarily through case writing. Governance, you pick up virtually 100% of it through case writing, strategy, and governance. Finance, you may have to spend a little bit of time on the notes. The notes aren't terribly long, but you'd have to go through the notes that we provide you with. But finance, to a large degree on the CP, is number 1 quantitative. So if you know how to do certain basic quants like NPV, valuations, etc., you're a large part of the way there. And even the qualitative portion of finance is not terribly sophisticated as long as you don't choose finance as your depth area. If you choose it as your depth area, then the body of knowledge is going to be quite a bit greater. Let me take a look here. Nikunj has a question. So we can say if we opt tax, there would be basic law related questions or case studies and not tax planning and related. Okay, Nikunj, I'm not trying to understand your question, but are you saying to me if we don't choose tax? Because if you don't choose tax, then it's primarily compliance and you don't need to know a great deal when it comes to the sophisticated tax planning. If you do choose tax as your depth area on day 2, then they will test a lot of the more sophisticated tax planning. Did I understand your question correctly? Please tell me if I didn't. Let's give you a minute. I did. Okay, wonderful. So this completes the portion of the session that I'm doing. I'm now going to stop sharing my screen and Ira will share his screen and start with part 4, the past program for Indian CAs.
So I'm starting at part number 4. Okay. So who are we? Like, who is past? Here's some, uh, just a little bit of information on us. We've been doing this obviously for a long time, over 25 years. We've done it for all the big firms. We currently do the PwC program across Canada. And we've been doing that for many years. Michael did very well when he wrote. He actually got the gold medal, which is huge. And over the years, I think we've had really good feedback from students. So that's just a brief summary of who are we. So, all right, what we have designed is we've designed a program specifically for Indian and international students, of which most are from India. It includes three things: technical training, case writing, and personal counseling. This is an overall picture. Part of the program is self-study. Two things for self-study. Number one, you have a technical binder, you watch the technical videos. That's an ongoing process. We give you the binder online, and we also give it to you in hard copy. Number two, you'll be doing some cases on your own. Once you've watched the introduction to case writing, you can then do practice cases. In fact, when people sign up for the course, I give a bunch of practice cases. They're not to be handed in. I don't know who does them, but depending on when you sign up for the course, if you sign up several months before the classes begin, why not get started and already start practicing some cases after you've watched the introduction to case writing? So, and in addition to that, hopefully you're going to write other cases from recent CFEs over the course of the time period when you're studying. And that's also stuff you're doing on your own. But we also have the formal instruction. So obviously you're going to write cases for us, hand them in, we're going to mark them, and then we're going to have a take-up class. We also do technical sessions live, financial accounting, I think all of them are live, management accounting, a portion of them are live. We also have certain sessions, point D, called technique sessions. I'll show you these afterwards. They're basically techniques of certain things you can do to help you increase your chances of moving up to competent. And we have personal counseling, where you meet with a marker who sits down with you for half an hour and goes over your case. So I call that the formal instruction, and the first part was the self-study. Now, the technical studying, as I just said, we do live financial accounting and some of management accounting. We have videos on everything. So the sessions, the stuff we don't do live, the other competency areas, like audit, tax, we have videos on everything. Even the stuff we do live, we record it, and then you have access to the videos. So, look, this is a very important part of your studying. Many people learned technical many years ago. You may not be familiar with Canada's tax system. You may not be familiar with ASPE. We cover, I'm not going to say it's 100%, but we really do cover the overwhelming majority of major topics for every competency. So there's no question, if you want to look at it in its most simplest form, this exam can be divided up between 50-50. 50% is knowing your technical. But the other 50% is case writing and applying the technical. But, it's hard to apply technical if you don't know the technical. The case writing, as I just said, is both self-marking, either the practice cases that I give you or some recent CFEs that you're going to probably be writing, and marking cases that we mark. So you hand in a lot of cases for marking. We mark them, we give you comments. That's a very important piece. That's how you learn how to improve your case writing. And we have classes, we have case take-ups. They're live, and then we record them. And then we have the technique sessions. So if you want to see an example of a case take-up, you can have a look here. Here's a link to a session, and here's a link to a technical take-up. Now, the personal counseling sessions, we give 3 of them, which I think is a pretty good number. What that means, you hand in the case to be marked. The marker that marks your case sets up probably a Zoom session with you for half an hour and goes over your case. Okay, so we do that 3 times, which again, I think is a pretty decent number. The other cases that we mark, the marker will give you, hopefully, extensive comments on what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong. That's a very important piece to get feedback from the marker. Now, you know, if you have a CA from India or Pakistan, you're not required to take Capstone 1 and 2. Okay, Capstone 1 is important for day 1 of the CFE. And Capstone 2 is really just practice case writing. We do have an alternative to Capstone 2. In our program, we incorporate really both Capstone 1 and Capstone 2. Okay, I'll explain a little more afterwards when I get into the pricing, how we do that. So look, this is kind of an important slide. I mean, our goal is to help you pass. So we try to do everything we can to make life easier for you. As it says here, the courses provide for maximum flexibility. We offer stuff live online. Everything is on video, available 24/7. There are no maximums. You can watch videos as much as you want, whenever you want. And even some sessions we do on IST time for those people living in India. We'll do the session 9 in the morning, which will be about 7:30, I think, at night in India. So you want a bird's eye view over the whole course. It's approximately 30 classes. There's lots of videos. I'm not saying you have to watch every single technical video. If you study technical in the binder and you're happy with it and you know the topic, you don't have to watch the video, but we have videos. We mark a lot of cases. Might be a little less, it might be 23, something like that, of cases. That includes the Capstone 2 marking. I'll explain that again when I do the pricing. And we've got 3 personal counseling sessions. I think we're the only ones, to be totally honest, I think we're the only ones in Canada that have a comprehensive course for Indian students. Just understand what I mean when I say a comprehensive course. Okay, that may not be totally obvious. What we could have done for people from India is we could have taken our case writing course in the summer. We have a course in the summer called our comprehensive course. I could have taken that course and said, okay, here, just join the Canadian students and go to the case writing course in the summer. We never thought that would be sufficient. So what we did is we took our existing courses and technical and binders, we threw everything and into this course and designed a course for Indian students that incorporates everything. Why did we do that? I think people from India need it. That's the truth. I don't think it's sufficient. We don't think it's sufficient if you just go and take our summer course. So, you know, I can go and give you a case writing course. And to be honest, that's some of the other providers out there, that's kind of what they do. They call it an Indian program. You're taking exactly the same course that the Canadian students are taking. It's much, much less than ultimately what we're offering. And again, it's not that I'm dying to offer like everything here. We've had to cut the price tremendously. I'll show you that in a few minutes, compared to what we'd be charging Canadian students in order to make this affordable. But the problem is we're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. I want to, offer something that it is not too costly, but the problem is it's got to include a lot of stuff in order to properly prepare you.
What I'd like to talk about now are the past schedules for the 026 CFE. When you look at the past schedules on the past website for writing the CFE in September 026, what you're going to see are 2 versions, a version 1 schedule and a version 2 schedule. The classes are identical for both versions, so you're going to get the same course regardless of whether you take version 1 and version 2. So why do we have 2 versions? version one, you're writing the cases earlier. You begin the case writing for version one already in January. You don't begin the case writing in version two until the very end of March, March 31st. So we strongly recommend version one unless you register with us a short period before the CP. So for example, if you register with us around January, then we strongly recommend you go into version one so you can get started on your case writing as soon as possible. The earlier you begin your case writing, the better, because it can take quite a while to learn how to write cases effectively. The only time we generally recommend version two is if somebody registers fairly late. Let's say you were to register, I don't know, well into March, and you have the time to study enough to write the CP in September, but it's already well into March. So there, we would put you into version two, because it's obviously too late to begin your case writing in January. If it's already March, we'd put you into version two. But if you register soon, this recording is being recorded at the end of December 2025. If you register soon, we would strongly recommend that you go into version one, and we would strongly recommend that you do register soon so you can get started in your case writing as soon as possible. The earlier you start in your case writing, the better. Now, sometimes we get the question, how soon do I need to start my studying in order to write my CP? So here's what I would advise you. For those people who want to write in June of 2026, it's best to start no later than around November 2025, which is already a month ago. But there are people who contact us who aren't really that busy with work. They either don't have a full-time job or they don't have any job at all, and they have a lot of time on their hands. If you have a lot of time in your hands and you can spend maybe 15 to 20 hours, probably closer to 20, studying for the CP, then even if you start later than November, say you start beginning of January, you may still be able to make it and write the exam in June. But if you're working full time, I think it would be very hard unless you start around November. If you start much later than that, I think it would be quite hard to be ready for June. So you would need to have a lot of time on your hands if you want to write in June, and you want to start later than November. So again, if you start in January and you have lots of time, you can write in June. Otherwise, I don't recommend it. What about for September? For September CP, it's best to start, as I mentioned in the previous slide, in January. So I would try to register as soon as possible and get started. But once again, you can start later if you have a lot of time to devote. Again, 15 to 20 hours, probably closer to 20. The bottom line is that's why we have version two. Version two, as I said before, you don't start your case writing until the end of March, and that's for people who only begin their study process by registering with us in March. And again, that would only work well for people who have a lot of time in their hands. If you have a full-time job and other family responsibilities, etc., I strongly recommend, if you want to write in September, get started as soon as possible. Get started, right after the holidays if you can, in January. In terms of hours per week, if you're working, probably about 10 to 15 hours per week. And as I said, this assumes that you don't start too close to the time of the CP. So if you're going to say start in January for the September CP, about 10 to 15 hours should do the job. But again, I should warn you that it really varies from person to person. When people ask me how much time I need, very hard to say it's the same amount of hours for everybody, because some people are stronger technically than others, so therefore they're going to need less time for their technical studying. Some people might pick up case writing a little more quickly than others. So keep in mind, this is just an average. It's different for everybody. And you can certainly be working full time while you study. The vast majority of our students are working full time while they're studying. As long as you start early enough, that's fine. Working full time, starting say around January for the September CP, while you're working full time, should work just fine. A final point I'd like to deal with is what happens if you start with the intention of writing in June. And let's say, come along March, you say to yourself, boy, you know what? I don't think I'll be ready for June. Not a problem to change it to the September offering. PASS will automatically put you into the September offering. So if you change your mind, there's no extra cost if you switch from the June offering to the September offering in PASS. The only extra cost you would have is with the institute that you're registered with. So for example, let's say you're registered with CPA Ontario. For CPA Ontario, to write the June CP, you'd have to register by February 23rd. Let's say in March 31st, you decide, you know what, I'm not going to be ready for the June CP. I want to switch to September. They would give you back 80% of your fees. Their rule is as long as I withdraw from the June CP prior to the beginning of the CP, prior to day one of the CP, so anywhere from February 23rd right up until day one of the CP, they will give me back 80% of my fee. So if in March or even April or May, you decide too late to write, I'm not ready to write in June. Sorry, not too late. I'm just not ready to write in June. Not the end of the world. You could withdraw and get back 80% of your money through CPA Ontario. If you're writing out west or out east, you have to communicate either with CPA of Western CPA WSB if you're out west, or with a provincial institute out east. Every institute has their own rules in terms of how much money they'll give you back should you decide not to write in June and defer until September. But PASS will not charge any extra fee to move you into our September offering.
So over the years, we have many, testimonials. I'm not going to read all these out or whatever. You can kind of see these. We have many testimonials from people that, I don't know, that passed their CFE. Look at this one, passed their CFE, been out of school for 14 years, passed the exam. Again, you can kind of look at this when you watch the video. I don't have to sit here and read that out. I'll just focus on a couple of some interesting points. People like the customized study program, the binders of presentations, the techniques that I mentioned before, which I'll explain. I think it comes up afterwards. Okay, that we do. This person liked the techniques. And here's one. Pass in the first attempt, targeted approach. Okay, fine. Lectures were helpful. All right. So let's talk about to spend a few minutes on registration and fees. So to register, you go to the website. Fine. This is a link for CAs living in Canada, for Indian CAs living in Canada and Indian CAs currently not living in Canada. You go to this. All right, two separate links. Fine. Now, we have a relationship with the ICAI, the Toronto chapter. So you join the chapter, you're eligible for a 15% discount. We give the same discount for people living in India. Okay, it's just a deal that we do. We give you a coupon code for the 15%. There are three options. It's really kind of two, but I'm going to call it three for how you register. Option one, we call it the PASS course plus the alternative to Capstone 1 and 2. Option three, you take the PASS course, but you don't take the alternative to Capstone 1 and 2. And option two, you take our course and then you go to Capstone 1 and 2. Not so realistic for 98% of the people from India. Let's look at them and I'll walk you through each one. Option one is the most popular option. You're signing up for our course. The fee is $27.95. We give a 15% discount. 2 months before the CFE, we send an email and we tell you to buy the capstone material for $250. You pay that to CPA. This is your total cost. The reason this is the most popular is because what we're doing in option one is we are marking all of the past cases in the course, plus we are marking the capstone 2 cases. Effectively, it's like you're taking capstone 2. The only difference is you're taking it through us. You're giving me the case to mark. You're not giving CPA the case to mark. You are writing the identical cases. So you're not going to capstone 2, but you're taking what we call the alternative, the capstone 1 and 2. So you're writing a lot of cases. If you want to see how many, it's actually 22. You're writing 2 day 1 practice cases, 4 day 2, and 16 day 3. That includes the capstone 2 marking. this is the most popular option because people want us to mark a lot of cases. And it makes sense. I agree. Like that is helpful.
Option two is an option that very, very few of our students take. Under this option, you would take the pass course, and then you would do Capstone 1 and Capstone 2 with CPA Canada. So to take the pass course, you'd pay $19.95, assuming the 15% discount, that would cost you $60.95. And then you would have to spend $1,400 for each of Capstone 1 and 2 to take it with CPA Ontario. Now, the reason why very few people will take this option is that number one, it's a great deal more expensive than doing Capstone 2 with Pass, as we explained in option number one. Because if you simply attend Pass and you take the option that includes the equivalent of Capstone 2, you're talking about paying $2,625, and that gives you the Pass course plus the equivalent of Capstone 2. If you decide, you know what, I'm going to go and do this through CPA Canada, I'm going to do Capstone 1 and 2 through CPA Canada, you're talking about spending $2,800 for Capstone 1 and 2 for a total of $4,495. That is $1,870 more than what it would cost you to do option 1. And what are you really getting for that? You're getting a similar Capstone 2 to what you would get if you did option 1 with Pass. And for Capstone 1, you're going to end up doing that whole group project and doing the presentation to the board of directors. And you're going to be paying $1,400 to do that, but it's not going to help you very much for the CP. It'll help you build team building skills and all sorts of skills that are irrelevant to the CP, and it'll also waste a lot of time. So with this option, you're spending a great deal more money and you're wasting more time. And as I said, the Capstone 2 portion is very good, whether you take it with us or CPA Canada. But the Capstone 2 with us is very similar to taking with CPA Canada and a lot less expensive. Capstone 1, I don't think is a good use of your time. Now, the costs that we've shown you here are based on CPA Ontario. The figures are slightly different for CPA in the CPA Western School of Business. Here, we came out here, basically, you're paying an extra $1,870 to do this option compared with option 1. And for the case of Western Canada, the figure is somewhat different, but either way, you are going to spend a lot more money on this option and waste a lot more time. We don't recommend this option. In the past, the only students we've had who've taken this option for the most part have been people who are in firms where the firm actually pays for them to do Capstone 1 and Capstone 2 with CPA Canada, and where the firm says, I want you to go and do Capstone 1 and 2. Those are really the only people I find who've chosen this option. A third option that we've had a few students do, again, a minority of our students, is what they'll do is they will take the pass course, which is $19.95 less the 50% discount, which is $16.95. And then what they'll do is they'll purchase the Capstone 2 material so they can write the practice cases, but they will not attend the equivalent to Capstone 2 with pass or go to the CPA Canada version of Capstone 2. They will simply buy the cases and mark the cases on their own. So because they're not having their cases professionally marked, their Capstone 2 cases professionally marked, it's obviously going to be less expensive. You're just going to pay for the pass course and for the cost of purchasing the Capstone 2 material. And keep in mind that Capstone 2 material is the prior CP cases with marking guides. This option, quite frankly, is not an ideal option, but if you don't have the funds to do option 1, then it's the next best alternative. It's not ideal, but we always do have some students who unfortunately don't have the funds to do the ideal option 1, so they choose option 3 and they mark the cases themselves. So at the end of the day, just to summarize, PASS strongly recommends option 1, which is where you do the pass course, and then you'll do Capstone 2 with pass as opposed to CPA Canada. Capstone 1 you won't actually attend, but pass will give you summary material that you need. So you'll have the necessary information from Capstone 1 so that you'll be well prepared for day 1. By taking option number one, you'll have a tremendous amount of opportunity to write cases and have them marked professionally. And it's a lot more economical than option two, where you do capstone one and two with CPA Canada. Also, as I mentioned before, under this option, you're not going to waste time doing capstone two. You're not going to waste 6 or 7 weeks working on a big group project that doesn't really help you much for the CP. And again, option three is a viable option, but again, it's meant for people who just have limited funds. If you have the funds to do option one, I recommend it. If you don't, it's still a viable option to do option three and just take the past course and then mark your own capstone two cases. Regardless of the option you choose, payment is generally made by credit card. If you cannot pay the full amount upfront, then we would come up with an installment plan. We would discuss with you a plan that works for you. Normally, we prefer the installment plans to be no longer than 4 or 5 months. But again, we would discuss your particular financial situation and try to come up with an installment plan that works for you. We're fairly flexible with regard to the number of installments. And again, that's something we would discuss with you when you register. So what are the total fees to obtain the Canadian CPA? The total fees are about $5,000 US. And again, we've given you a breakdown of the fees. I'll let you look at this slide more carefully on your own. I don't have a huge amount to add to it. Obviously, the $5,000 is only if somebody has to travel from India. If you're already living in Canada, then the total fee in Canadian dollars is only 5,275, which is a lot less than 5,000 US. So keep in mind that 5,000 US is only if you have to come all the way from India. Otherwise, it's closer to 5,000 Canadian. I'll let you look more closely at this on your own. Now, in addition to registering with PASS, as we said earlier, you would have to register with the CPA Provincial Institute in order to write. So starting with Ontario, in order to write the CP, you would register with CPA Ontario if you are living in Ontario, you're planning to live in Ontario, and you'd register with CPA Western School of Business if you're living out west in one of the western provinces, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, or BC. So if you're living there or planning to live in one of the western provinces, you would register with CPA Western School of Business. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day if you, for example, were to register with CPA Ontario and then decide that you want to move out west. That doesn't matter. If you register with CPA Ontario, it simply means you need to write in Ontario. If you register with CPA Western School of Business, it means you need to write out west. However, if after that you want to move and work anywhere in Canada, it doesn't matter where you wrote your exam. So please understand the reason we're saying that if you're going to live or planning to live in Ontario, you should register with CPA Ontario is it's simply easier if you're living in Ontario to just write in Ontario and you need to write where you register. So if you're registering CPA Ontario, you need to write in Ontario. If you're registering with CPA Western School of Business, you need to write in one of the Western provinces. We recommend you register as soon as possible. If you're planning to write the CP in June 26th, keep in mind that registration must be complete before March 2nd in Ontario and February 16th in Western Canada. And it can take a significant amount of time for your registration to be processed, particularly by CPA Ontario. So at the end of the day, given that it can take sometimes, as you'll see on the next slide, as much as 8 to 12 weeks. Bottom line is that if you have not yet registered with CPA Ontario and you want to write in June, I would contact them to make sure that they can get your registration finalized before it's time to register for the CP. Because you first have to register with the Institute and only then can you register for the CP. So given the registration dates for the June CP are coming up fairly close, not that close, but we're talking February, March. Bottom line is I would just make sure that they can process your registration for membership in time for you to register for the CP for June. I would contact your institute if you want to write in June and you have not yet registered with an institute. Even if you're planning to write in September, I wouldn't wait too long to register. CPA registration deadline for the September 026 CP is June 1st in Western Canada through the CPA Western School of Business. I don't yet have a registration deadline for Ontario, but it'll probably be around the same time. So if you're not writing until June, I'm sorry, if you're not writing until September and you have until June to register for the CP, it's not a huge hurry to register with the Institute, but I'd still do so sooner rather than later, particularly in Ontario, where it takes a long time for them to process your membership application. So now, at this point, I certainly would wait until January to register because if you register right now in December, you're going to have to pay for half of the 2025 year, which would be a waste of money. So at this point, I would just wait until January and register. You can start the course immediately. You don't have to be registered with the Canadian CPA Institute to start with PASS. We always strongly urge people to start studying well before their registration is processed. Because think about it. Let's say I want to write in September. Does it make sense to wait 8 or 12 weeks till they process my application, till I start studying? You may as well register with PASS and get started on your studying while they're processing your application. I don't think we've ever had a situation where there was a problem and somebody who had a bona fide Indian CA had any problem registering. So it's never ever been an issue. So at the end of the day, register with the Institute, but while you're waiting for your registration to be processed, make sure to register with PASS. So register with PASS as soon as you can. Get started on your studying while they're processing your application. If it ever were to happen, which again, I can't recall it ever happening, that something went wrong with your registration, PASS would refund your fees, less any costs we incurred, so that almost all of your fees would be refunded. But again, highly unlikely scenario. This has never occurred. And we've been teaching Indian students and other international students for many, many, many years. Registration, as I said, with CPA Ontario, for whatever reason, takes a very long time. It's quite a bit quicker if you register with CPA WSB. Regardless of the province you register with, as I mentioned earlier, you can work and practice in any province. It simply affects where you write. As I said earlier, at the end of the day, you need to write in the province in which you register. That's why I said that if you're going to be living in Ontario, obviously register with CPA Ontario because that's where you're going to be writing. And if you're living out west or plan to live out west, register with CPA WSB so that you can write where you live. What we did here was we gave you some important links if you want further information from the respective institutes. On this slide, I've given you information on some good links for CPA Ontario. Here I've given you some important links for the Western School of Business.
All right. Well, just to finish off, Part 9, Planning Immigration. Look, we do not get involved very much at all in immigration. It's not our expertise. Some basics. There's 4 ways, 4 visa types to plan your CPA exam. You want to do a tourist visa, that will work in Ontario. A work visa will work anywhere. The PR is probably the best. The study visa across Canada. So, look, the study visa, I said the PR is the best. I don't know. Here I'm saying the study visa is the most preferred way. Immigration has gone through a lot of changes in the last 2 years. Unfortunately, it has not gotten easier. It's not so easy to get the PR. But if you're already here, great. If you're not already here, okay, here's some basic guidance. Okay, here's some basic guidance. But my real recommendation is go call someone or email someone who actually knows about immigration. We have a person that we've dealt with who I think is very good, and this company Globazon or whatever, that's his email. So if you don't live here, or if you know of someone who does not live here, they're from India, and they want help on the immigration side, write this email. Okay, we are just not knowledgeable enough to really give enough information and for you to rely on us.
I'm sure that many of you will have questions after you watch this video. By all means, please feel free to contact me, Michael Levy, or my co-director, Ira Walfish. with any questions that you have. What we've given you here is our email. We've also given you our phone numbers, which is the same as our WhatsApp numbers. So by all means, if you have any questions, we'd be delighted to speak with you and answer any questions you have. We've also given you a link to the PASS website if you'd like to find further information on our website. One of the things we have on our website that you're going to find quite useful is going to be our FAQs. So that'll probably have quite a few questions and answers you might find useful. Also, we have some blogs that I think you'll find very useful. At the end of the day, we understand that students are going to have questions. At the end of the day, most of you are not very familiar with the program here in Canada for qualifying for the CPA. So it's quite natural that you'd have questions, and we're there to answer them. As I said, as you on the previous slide, we're available by email, by WhatsApp, whatever works for you. One of our strengths, I believe, is our availability to students. You'll see when you look at our testimonials or our Google reviews that students tend to appreciate this. This is just one example of a testimonial. I thank you and Michael for your continued guidance, support, and prompt responses to any questions. We know that people have questions, whether it's before they register to learn more about the CPA program or questions regarding classes we've given, and we know how important it is to have our support, and we do our best to provide support.
So, 4 important takeaways, and then I'm done. Number 1, I didn't talk about this. I think Michael mentioned this. I didn't talk about this, but please plan to write the CFE in 25 or 26. The system is undergoing major change in 27. We have no idea what's going to happen, meaning with the MOU. There won't be a CFE in 27. Maybe it'll get easier. Maybe it'll get harder. I have no idea. Maybe they'll force people from India to do the identical thing as Canadians. Who the heck knows? Well, it's a huge risk. So if you know of anyone that is considering this, there is a window now. There is a window. They could start the process and they could write in 26 and they'll be fine. 27, I don't know. All bets are off for 2027. Number 2, you can do this working full time. It does not matter where you live. You can live in India, you could live in Canada, you could live in the Middle East. It makes no difference where you live. The only stipulation is you have to go to Canada to write the exam in one of the provinces. Number 3, starting early is a big part of it. That is very helpful. Practice is critical. So starting early, you are increasing your chances of passing dramatically by starting early. And what I call starting early, I don't know, November, December, for May. I've even had people start in January. And again, depending on how much time they have and they passed for May. But the truth is, the closer we get to the CFE, when you're starting very late, you may not have enough time to write the cases or study the technical. That becomes a problem. And number 4, technical review is critical, but you don't need perfect technical before you start writing cases. This is an important point. You are not going to finish your technical before you start writing cases. Go in with that assumption. I don't care when you register. If you registered 6 months ago, I don't think you'd finish your technical in 6 months. You're still going to have to start writing cases before you finish your technical, and you'll improve your technical by writing cases. It's just the way the system works. It's really a combined approach. Now, if you start earlier and you want to spend a couple of months on technical just to get your feet wet, great. But you won't be finished. You're still going to write cases. There's still going to be things you don't know technically. But you're going to pick up technical points and you're going to learn about case writing the sooner you get into case writing. So that, I think, is a very important point. I don't think it's totally intuitive or obvious. You'll write cases, but you will not have finished your studying for your technical. Now, people, I know I said before, I just want to maybe not correct, but I guess explain something I said before about those techniques I think Michael had that on a slide earlier, and I forgot that it was his slide or whatever, where he showed those techniques that we have in our comprehensive course. They're not really technical, but they're techniques of things you could do to move up the levels. Okay, I'm not going into the whole passing profile now. We do that on the first session. But when I say move up the levels, that's the whole goal. So we have these technique sessions. I'm just saying that now because I mentioned it before and I didn't explain it. We have these technique sessions in financial accounting and auditing, in quantitative, that are very important sessions, and they help you move up the levels, which is important to passing.
Before we end the session, I just want to mention that for those of you who don't have work and are looking for work, this is a recruiting agency you may want to work with. We don't have very much experience with them. We met Smita at an event, and you may want to contact Smita if you're looking for work. That's not something we personally get involved in, but that would be one possible avenue you might pursue if you're looking for work. If you're not already living in Canada, we do have a video on life in Canada. Obviously, this is only relevant for people who are outside Canada now and seeking to move. For those of you who are here, I think you know what life in Canada is like. So just to end the presentation, I think that this saying by Robert Collier is very apropos for people writing the CV. Success is a sum of small efforts repeated day in and day out. And that's what studying for the CP is all about. You're making constant efforts, you're writing a case, you're writing another case, etc., etc. It seems like you're not making a lot of progress at the time, but the accumulation of all these efforts at the end of the day enable you to develop the skill you need to actually write the CP successfully. These efforts repeated day in and day out is really what leads ultimately to success. I really hope you found this session helpful, and as you mentioned earlier, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact Ira or myself.